The drill bit screamed as it tore through the last layer of rock. Brel wiped sweat from his forehead and checked the readout on his scanner. Nothing, just empty space beyond the wall, which made no sense at all. His crew had been drilling for 3 weeks straight on this worthless moon, looking for titanium deposits that kept showing up on orbital scans but never materialized when they dug. "Hey, boss, we got something weird here," Brel called into his comm unit. His supervisor, a grumpy Corvan named Dax, responded with his usual enthusiasm. "Weird doesn't pay the bills. Is it titanium?" "No, it's like a hollow space." "Big one, too." Silence on the other end. Then Dax's voice came back, sharper this time. "How big?" Brel ran his scanner along the hole they had made. The numbers kept climbing. Really big. Like maybe the size of a city block. "And boss, the walls are made of something my scanner can't identify." 20 minutes later, Dax stood beside him, staring at the breach. They had widened it enough for a person to squeeze through. Dax shined his light into the darkness beyond. The beam disappeared into the black without reflecting off anything. "Corporate is going to want to see this," Dax muttered. "Brel, you're going in. Take a camera." Brel wanted to argue, but he needed this job. He strapped on his gear and squeezed through the opening. His boots hit smooth floor on the other side. As he stepped forward, lights began flickering on overhead, one section at a time, revealing a corridor that stretched impossibly far into the distance. The walls were metallic, but not like any metal Brel had seen. They seemed to shimmer slightly, as if not entirely solid. He walked forward, his camera recording everything. Side passages branched off every few meters, all leading deeper into whatever this place was. After 10 minutes of walking, Brel entered a massive chamber. His jaw dropped. Thousands of crystalline pods filled the space, arranged in perfect rows. Each pod was twice the height of a person and glowed with a faint blue light. Through the transparent surfaces, he could see figures inside. People. Humanoid people with pale skin and features that looked almost familiar from old history files. "Dax, you seeing this?" Brel whispered into his comm. "Holy ancestors. Are those what I think they are?" Brel approached the nearest pod. The figure inside was male, tall, with short dark hair and a peaceful expression. He wore a simple gray uniform. Text scrolled across a display panel on the pod's base, but Brel couldn't read the strange symbols. "I think these might be humans," Brel said. "Like actual humans. The extinct ones." "Don't touch anything," Dax ordered. "I'm calling this in right now." But Brel was already reaching for his camera, trying to get a better angle. His elbow bumped against a control panel jutting from the pod's side. The panel lit up. Text scrolled faster across the display. Then a sound filled the chamber, a deep thrumming that made Brel's teeth ache. "What did you do?" Dax shouted through the comm. "Nothing. I just touched it." Red lights began flashing throughout the chamber. 6 pods near Brel hissed as their seals broke. The blue glow intensified, then faded. The crystalline surfaces retracted into the bases of the pods. Brel stumbled backward as the figure in the nearest pod opened its eyes. They were brown, fully human eyes, and they looked directly at him with confusion and growing alarm. The human sat up slowly, gasping. Its chest heaved as it sucked in air. Around the chamber, 5 other pods had opened. Their occupants were also stirring, coughing, reaching for the sides of their pods. The first human tried to speak. The words were nonsense, some unknown language that sounded harsh and clipped. Brel held up his hands, trying to show he meant no harm. The human swung its legs over the side of the pod and stood. It was taller than Brel by a full head. The human wobbled, caught itself on the pod, then looked around the chamber with growing horror. "Where?" the human said in its strange language. Then more words faster, with increasing panic. The other 5 humans were out of their pods now. One was female with long black hair. She was speaking to the tall male, her voice urgent. Another male, older with gray at his temples, looked around the chamber and said something that made the others go quiet. Brel's comm unit crackled. "Security is on the way. Get out of there now." But Brel couldn't move. He was watching history come back to life. The older male approached him cautiously. He pointed to himself and said something that might have been a name. Then he pointed at Brel and raised his eyebrows in question. "Brel," the miner managed to say. "My name is Brel." The human nodded slowly. He looked around again, at the thousands of unopened pods, at the ancient facility, at everything that should not exist. When he looked back at Brel, there was something in his eyes that made the young Quarvan's blood run cold. It was not anger or fear. It was grief mixed with terrible understanding. The human said one word slowly and clearly as if he wanted Brel to remember it. Then he pointed upward, toward the sky beyond the rock and metal. Brel didn't understand the word, but he understood the gesture. Whatever these humans had been running from, whatever had made them hide in these pods for thousands of years, it was up there somewhere. And now that they were awake, it would know. Security forces surrounded the breach point within the hour. 12 armed Quarvan soldiers pointed their weapons at the opening, while medics stood ready behind portable barriers. Dax had explained the situation 3 times already, but nobody seemed to believe him until the first human emerged from the darkness. David Ross stepped into the mining site's harsh artificial lighting and immediately raised his hands. He spoke in that same unknown language, his tone calm and measured. Behind him came Nina Ashford, followed by Samuel Cross and Amy Zhang. The other 2 humans stayed inside, too weak to walk. The security commander, a female Quarvan named Tess, kept her weapon trained on David's chest. "Don't move. We have this area locked down." David obviously didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. He remained still, hands visible, while Nina pulled out a small device from her uniform pocket. She held it up slowly, showing it wasn't a weapon, then activated it. The device projected a holographic display covered in symbols and diagrams. Nina worked quickly, her fingers dancing across the projection. She pointed at herself, then at the device, then at Tess. Samuel moved to help her, adding more symbols to the display. They were trying to build a translation matrix in real time. Clever, Tess admitted, though she didn't lower her weapon. "Keep going." It took 40 minutes of back and forth with Nina and Samuel frantically programming while Amy brought out a data pad salvaged from their suspension pods. Gradually, basic communication became possible. The device could handle simple concepts, though complex ideas got lost in translation. "How long?" David asked through the device. His voice came out flat and mechanical. "How long what?" Tess replied, "Sleep. How long sleep?" Tess looked at Dax, who checked his data pad. Based on the decay rate of the facility's power systems and the stellar drift calculations, approximately 10,000 years. The translation took a moment to process. When it did, Nina made a sound like a wounded animal. Samuel sat down hard on the ground. Amy's face went blank and she turned away. David closed his eyes and took a long, shaking breath. "Everyone?" David asked. "All gone?" "If you mean your species, yes. Humans have been considered extinct for millennia. There are ruins on a few worlds, some records, but nothing living. Until now," David translated for the others. Amy started laughing, but it wasn't a happy sound. Nina was crying silently. Samuel just stared at the rocky ground. David stood straight, shoulders back, looking every bit the military officer he had been 10,000 years ago. "We need to speak to your leaders," David said carefully. "Important. Very important." News of the discovery spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. Within 3 days, the Galactic Council had convened an emergency session. Representatives from 40 species gathered in the Great Hall on Sanctum 7th, all wanting to know about the humans who had returned from the dead. Dr. Althea Winters arrived at the mining site on the 2nd day. She had spent her entire career studying the scattered remnants of human civilization, and now she stood face to face with actual humans. Her hand shook as she approached David. "I have studied your people my whole life," Althea said through the translation device. "I never thought I would meet one." David gave her a tired smile. "What do you know about us?" "Not much. Your species disappeared suddenly. Every human world went silent within the same week. We have ruins, some technology we still don't fully understand, and warnings. Lots of warnings scattered across space. Most of them say the same thing. Let humanity sleep." "You found the beacons," David said. It wasn't a question. Yes, what were you hiding from? David looked at Nina, who had been working with council scientists to access the facility's computer systems. She nodded at him. "It was time. We weren't hiding," David said. "We were hiding the galaxy." He gestured for everyone to follow him back into the facility. They walked through the corridors to a control room that Nina had activated. Ancient screens flickered to life, showing star maps and data streams. Samuel worked the controls, pulling up files that had been waiting for 10,000 years. An image appeared on the main screen. It showed a creature that shouldn't exist, something massive, organic, alive in the void of space. The image quality was poor, but the scale was clear. The thing was the size of a small moon, and it was moving. We call it the Devourer, David said. 12,000 years ago, we found it feeding on a dying star at the edge of the galaxy. Our explorers disturbed it. It followed them back to human space. Samuel brought up more files. Battle reports. Casualty lists. Images of devastated worlds. The creature had destroyed 3 human colonies before humanity understood what they were facing. Conventional weapons did nothing. The Devourer consumed energy and matter, growing stronger with each attack. We developed the Lullaby Protocol, Nina explained, a quantum field generator that put all of us to sleep and masked our presence. The Devourer hunts by detecting intelligent thought patterns. We made ourselves invisible by going silent. Where is it now? Althea asked, though she dreaded the answer. Unknown, Samuel said. It went dormant when it couldn't find us. Drifted away into the space between galaxies. Tess spoke up from the back of the room. Then why are you telling us this? If it's gone, why wake up at all? David turned to face her, and his expression made everyone in the room go cold. Because we didn't wake up by choice. Your miner triggered the facility. And when humans woke up, we started thinking again. Complex thoughts. Thoughts the Devourer can sense across thousands of light years. You're saying it knows you're awake? We're saying it's already coming back. Samuel pulled up the long-range sensor data the facility had been collecting. There, at the very edge of detection, was a massive energy signature moving through deep space toward the galaxy. Moving fast, the room erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted questions and accusations. Some demanded the humans be put back to sleep immediately. Others wanted to evacuate their homeworlds. Althea just stared at the screen, watching the signature creep closer. David waited for the noise to die down, then spoke clearly through the translator. We have 3 weeks before it reaches Council space. We need to talk about what happens next. The Galactic Council had faced many crises in its 10,000-year history. Wars, plagues, economic collapses, even first contact situations that went poorly. But nothing had prepared them for the news that a moon-sized creature was coming to eat everyone. Council scientists worked around the clock analyzing the data from the human facility. Every simulation came back with the same conclusion. If the Devourer was real and as powerful as the human records indicated, the galaxy had approximately 6 months to live after it arrived. The chamber of the High Council became a war room. Holographic displays showed tactical projections and fleet movements. Representatives argued constantly. The Orinthian Collective wanted to evacuate their core worlds to the far side of the galaxy. The Corvan Dominion insisted there must be a way to communicate with the creature and negotiate. The Celis Republic simply wanted to know if the humans had weapons that could kill it. Nina stood before the council, exhausted from days of translation work and technical briefings. Behind her, a holographic projection showed the Devourer's path through space 12,000 years ago. Each red dot marked a world it had consumed. The creature doesn't think like we do, Nina explained. It exists partially in quantum space, experiencing reality across multiple dimensions simultaneously. To it, the physical universe is cold and empty. The only warmth it can sense is the complex thought patterns of intelligent life. So it eats thoughts? Asked Ambassador Wren, a tall crystalline being from the Celis homeworld. Not exactly. It feeds on matter and energy, but it hunts by detecting consciousness. Your thoughts are like heat signatures to it. The more complex and organized your civilization, the easier you are to find. Then we go quiet like you did, suggested another representative. David shook his head. He stood beside Nina, his translation device hanging around his neck. The Lullaby Protocol took us years to develop and required technology you don't have. Even if you could build it, there isn't enough time. Besides, it only worked because we were a single species. You're 40 different races spread across thousands of worlds. Getting everyone to go silent at exactly the same moment is impossible. What about fighting it? Wren demanded. Your records show you wounded it at least once. We tried everything, Amy said. She had joined the briefings, bringing her military expertise. Energy weapons feed it. Kinetic weapons pass through it like it isn't fully solid. We managed to hurt it exactly once using a prototype entropy device that was almost as dangerous to us as it was to the creature. Then it adapted. Adapted how? It learned to avoid that frequency of attack. The Devourer isn't stupid. It's old, maybe older than our galaxy, and it remembers. Every tactic we used, it countered. Every weapon we deployed, it eventually ignored. The council chamber fell silent. Finally, Chancellor Orem, The elected head of the council spoke. The elderly Quarvan had led the government for 20 years and had never faced a problem he couldn't negotiate away. "What aren't you telling us?" Orym asked David directly. David exchanged glances with Nina and Amy. Then he nodded to Samuel, who activated a new file. The display changed to show schematics of weapons systems that made several representatives recoil. "Before we went to sleep, we prepared for the possibility that the Devourer might return even if we stayed silent," David said. "We built failsafes, weapons designed specifically to fight something like the Devourer." "What kind of weapons?" Samuel brought up the first schematic. "Reality shredders. They create localized tiers in spacetime that destabilize matter at the quantum level. We never tested them at full power because the math suggested they might tear holes in reality that wouldn't close." The next image showed sphere-like devices covered in strange symbols. "Entropy bombs. They accelerate the heat death of the universe in a limited area. Everything inside the blast radius reaches maximum entropy instantly. Matter, energy, even space itself becomes uniform and dead." More schematics appeared. Hunter swarms, self-replicating machines that could burrow into any substance. Quantum disruptors that could theoretically push matter out of normal space. Consciousness scramblers that would make an area of space unable to support organized thought. "These weapons are monstrous," Ren said quietly. "You built all of this?" "We were desperate," Nina said. "And we were losing. Every day the Devourer killed billions. We knew these weapons might have consequences we couldn't predict, but we were running out of options. In the end, we chose the Lullaby Protocol instead because at least it only risked us." "But now we're all at risk," Orym said. "And you're offering us these weapons?" "We're offering you a choice," David replied. "The weapons are stored in secure vaults throughout the facility. We can activate them if the Council decides to fight. And if we choose not to fight?" David had no answer for that. How could he tell them that running would only delay the inevitable? The Devourer would follow them anywhere in the galaxy. Their only options were to fight, hide, or die. A commotion at the back of the chamber interrupted the discussion. A young aide rushed in, her face pale with fear. She handed a datapad to Chancellor Orym, who read it and went rigid. "The Devourer has entered the Outer Rim territories," Orym announced. "It just passed through the Helios system." The star collapsed. 12 billion souls lost. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted, some fleeing immediately to arrange evacuations of their homeworlds. Others demanded immediate military action. A few simply sat in shock, unable to process what they had just heard. Nina grabbed David's arm. "They're not ready for this. Look at them. They've had peace for 10,000 years. They don't know how to fight something they can't understand." "Then we teach them," David said. He raised his voice, cutting through the chaos. "Listen to me! Your people are dying right now while you argue. The Devourer won't wait for you to make a decision. It's here." Slowly the chamber quieted. Representatives turned to look at the humans, these strangers from the distant past who had faced this nightmare before. "You have two choices," David continued. "Run and die slowly, or fight and maybe die quickly. Either way, doing nothing guarantees extinction. We've been where you are now. We know what it costs. But we also know that sometimes the only way forward is through the fire." Chancellor Orym stood. "Then we fight." "What do you need?" The facility transformed into a military installation overnight. Thousands of additional suspension pods were being opened carefully, each containing more humans who would wake to a universe that had moved on without them. Engineers, soldiers, scientists, civilians, all emerging from their long sleep to face an ancient enemy. Nina worked in a laboratory deep within the facility, surrounded by council scientists from a dozen different species. They had been studying the Devourer's biology for 3 days straight, trying to understand what they were dealing with. The results were not encouraging. "It doesn't make sense," said Prex, a brilliant Orinthian researcher whose crystalline body pulsed with frustration. "This creature violates fundamental laws of physics. It exists in normal space but also in quantum space simultaneously. Its mass shifts constantly. How does it maintain cohesion?" Nina pulled up another scan from the ancient human encounter. "Our scientists 12,000 years ago asked the same questions. The best theory they developed was that the Devourer isn't entirely native to our dimension. It's something that slipped through from somewhere else, trapped here, unable to return home. And it feeds to survive. More than that. Look at these readings." Nina highlighted sections of the scan. "These patterns repeat across its entire structure. They're organized, almost like neural pathways, but vastly more complex. The devourer isn't just alive. It's conscious. Maybe more conscious than we are. Prex leaned closer to the display. If it's conscious, why does it kill? Because it's in pain, Nina said quietly. Look at this. She showed them scans of the creature's energy signature. These fluctuations match distress patterns. The devourer is suffering. It's been suffering for eons. And the only thing that brings it relief, even temporarily, is feeding. Another scientist, a Quarvan named Dr. Seth, spoke up. You're suggesting this thing is the last of its kind? I'm suggesting it might be the only one of its kind that ever was in this universe. Lost, alone, unable to die, and every time it feeds, it senses the thoughts of the beings it consumes. For just a moment, it doesn't feel alone anymore. The laboratory went silent. They were looking at readings of a creature that had killed trillions, and Nina was asking them to feel sorry for it. That doesn't change what we have to do, Prex finally said. Sympathy won't stop it from eating us. No, Nina agreed. But understanding might give us another option. Meanwhile, in the command center, David coordinated with Amy and the newly awakened human military forces. Fleet commanders from the Council had gathered to plan their defense. The holographic display showed the Devourer's projected path through Council space. It's heading for the core worlds, Amy explained. Population density is highest there. More minds to sense, more matter to consume. How long until it reaches Sanctum 7? Asked Admiral Renth, commander of the Council's largest battle. Fleet. 5 days at its current speed, we can't evacuate. That many people in 5 days, then we stop it before it gets there. Renth pulled up tactical displays showing the combined military forces of the Council. Thousands of ships from dozens of worlds all converging on the Devourer's path. Your people successfully wounded this thing once. How did you do it? David gestured to several human officers who stepped forward. They looked uncomfortable, as if discussing old wounds that had never properly healed. Lieutenant Foster here commanded the strike that used the entropy device. David said, her entire squadron died in the attack, but she survived long enough to report the results. Foster was a woman in her 40s with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that had seen too much. We hit it with everything we had first. Conventional weapons to get its attention. Then we deployed the entropy bomb at close range. The blast created a zone of total death. Nothing can exist in maximum entropy. No energy, no information, no structure. And it worked? For about 30 seconds. We saw sections of the creature simply cease to exist. Like reality had given up on them. The Devourer screamed. We could hear it across every comm channel, every radio frequency. It was in pain. Real, terrible pain. But it survived. It pulled itself out of the blast zone and regenerated. Took it a few hours, but it came back. And when it attacked again, it avoided any ship carrying similar weapons. It had learned. Renth studied the tactical display. So we can hurt it, but we can't kill it. Not with that weapon, Foster said. But we have others now. The reality shredders might work better, and the hunter swarms can burrow into it faster than it can regenerate. Might work isn't good enough. It's all we have. David watched the officers plan their desperate attack. He had been a soldier most of his adult life. He knew what the numbers meant. The Council fleet would slow the Devourer down, maybe hurt it badly, but the cost would be devastating. Thousands of ships would be lost, millions of lives. Nina burst into the command center, startling everyone. I need to talk to you. All of you, right now. She brought up her research on the main display. We've been thinking about this wrong. We keep trying to kill the Devourer, but what if we could give it what it really needs? Food? Renth asked skeptically. No, connection. The creature is suffering because it's alone. It feeds on living things because their thoughts, their consciousness, gives it a brief moment of not being isolated. But what if we could give it that feeling permanently without it having to kill anyone? David frowned. How? The Lullaby Protocol created a quantum field that masked human consciousness. But what if we inverted it? What if we created a quantum field that simulated consciousness? An artificial garden of minds for the Devourer to dwell in? A trap? More like a sanctuary. We give it an entire universe of simulated beings to interact with. Make it so rich and complex that the Devourer chooses to stay there rather than hunting in real space. That's insane, Foster said. The power requirements alone would be astronomical. Less than fighting a war we can't win, Nina countered. And there's something else. If we do this right, the Devourer won't have to suffer anymore. We could give it peace, Amy stepped forward. Half my people are waking up to find everyone they knew dead. We've already lost everything. Now you want us to feel sorry for the thing that caused all this? I'm saying maybe there's a way where nobody else has to die, Nina replied. Not us, not the council species, and not the last creature of its kind in the universe. The room erupted into argument. Some supported Nina's plan. Others called it naive and dangerous. But David just stared at the display, thinking about choices and costs and what it meant to be human in a galaxy that had forgotten them. The council fleet formed up in deep space, 3 days' flight from Sanctum 7. Over 2,000 ships from 40 different worlds created a defensive wall across the Devourer's projected path. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Against any conventional threat, it would have been unstoppable. David stood on the bridge of the flagship Resolute, a massive Celis dreadnought that had been retrofitted with human weapon systems. Around him, council officers worked alongside newly awakened human soldiers, preparing for a battle none of them expected to survive. The Devourer will reach our position in 4 hours, Admiral Renth reported. All ships report ready status. Status on the beacon? David asked. Dr. Ashford reports the prototype is operational. They need more time for a full deployment. Time we don't have, David looked at the tactical display. Nina's beacon plan had split the defenders into 2 groups. The main fleet would engage the Devourer directly, using the human weapons to wound and contain it. Meanwhile, Nina and her team worked frantically on a station behind the lines, building the quantum field generator that would create the simulated consciousness space. The plan required perfect timing. They had to hurt the Devourer badly enough that it would be desperate for relief, then activate the beacon at the exact moment of its greatest weakness. If they attacked too hard, they might drive it away. If they didn't attack hard enough, it would simply destroy them and continue on to consume the core worlds. Foster commanded a squadron of modified human ships equipped with reality shredders. She had volunteered to lead the first strike, despite knowing her chances of survival were minimal. Through the comm channel, her voice came through steady and calm. All Hunter Swarm carriers report loaded and ready. Reality shredders charging. We're ready to make this thing remember us. Amy commanded another squadron, her ships loaded with entropy bombs. She had argued against Nina's plan, wanting to simply destroy the Devourer by any means necessary. But David had convinced her to give the beacon a chance. One chance. If this doesn't work, we go to full extermination protocol, Amy had insisted. I won't let that thing kill another world. Agreed, David had said. But let's try to save it first. And ourselves. Now, as the fleet waited in tense silence, sensors picked up the approaching energy signature. The Devourer emerged from the dark space between stars, and for the first time the Council defenders saw what humanity had fled from 12,000 years ago. It was impossible. That was the first thought that ran through every mind on every ship. The creature was the size of a small moon, but it moved with fluid grace. Its body seemed to shift between solid and ethereal, never quite settling into one state. Colors that shouldn't exist played across its surface. Where it passed, space itself seemed to ripple. All ships, this is Admiral Renth, hold position. Wait for my command. The Devourer sensed the fleet. It paused in its advance as if curious about the gathered forces. Then it moved forward again, accelerating. It was hungry. Foster, you're cleared for attack. Light it up. Foster's squadron broke formation, accelerating toward the creature at maximum speed. They scattered, making themselves harder targets, then fired their reality shredders in unison. Space itself screamed. The beams struck the Devourer's surface and reality began to tear. Holes appeared in the creature's body, regions where the laws of physics broke down completely. The Devourer recoiled, twisting away from the attack. For the first time in 10,000 years, it felt pain again. Direct hit, Foster reported. Deploying hunter swarms now. Thousands of tiny machines launched from her ships, each one programmed with a single purpose: burrow into the Devourer and destroy it from within. The swarms reached the creature and began digging through its strange flesh, multiplying as they went. The Devourer's response was immediate and terrible. It released a pulse of energy that vaporized half of Foster's squadron in an instant. The remaining ships scattered, but the creature was faster. It moved through space with impossible speed, crushing ships in its mass. All forces engage, Renth ordered. Do not let it break through. The fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy weapons, kinetic rounds, missiles, exotic radiation. Every type of armament the Council had developed over 10,000 years of civilization. Most of it did nothing. The Devourer absorbed energy attacks and phased through solid projectiles, but the human weapons worked. Amy's squadron deployed entropy bombs at close range. Zones of absolute death bloomed across the creature's body. Where the bombs detonated, nothing remained. Not matter, not energy, not even space. Just void. The Devourer thrashed. Its screams echoed across every frequency, a sound of pure agony that drove some crew members mad. But it was working. The creature was wounded, badly wounded, for the first time since humanity had gone silent. "Nina, the Devourer is contained, but we can't hold it much longer," David transmitted. "Status on the beacon?" Nina's voice came back strained. 30 seconds. We need 30 more seconds. Those 30 seconds cost everything. The Devourer, desperate and in pain, lashed out with renewed fury. Ships died by the dozens. The hunter swarms burrowed deeper, causing more damage, making the creature more desperate. Reality shredders tore new holes in space. Entropy bombs created dead zones that would never support life again. David watched hundreds of red indicators blink out on the tactical display. Each one was a ship, a crew, people who had volunteered to stand between their homes and oblivion. The cost was staggering, but they were holding. "Beacon is active," Nina shouted. "Activating now." The quantum field generator came online. For just a moment, space itself seemed to pause. Then the beacon began broadcasting, sending out a signal the Devourer couldn't ignore. It was the feeling of others like itself. The sensation of not being alone, the first real peace the creature had known in eons. The Devourer stopped attacking. Its massive form went still. Then slowly it began to move toward the beacon. Not hunting, not attacking, seeking. "It's working," Renth said, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "It's actually working." The creature reached the beacon station and its form began to dissolve, transforming from physical matter into pure consciousness as it entered the quantum space Nina had created. Inside that artificial realm, the Devourer found what it had been searching for since before the galaxy was young. It found home. The celebration across Council space lasted 3 days. Every world lit their skies with fireworks and festivals. The Devourer was contained. The galaxy was saved. Songs were written about the brave defenders who had stood against impossible odds. Monuments were planned for the fallen. But in the facility on the mining moon where it all began, David sat alone in his quarters and felt nothing like victory. Nina found him there, staring at casualty reports on his datapad. Over 800 ships lost in the battle, more than 2 million crew members dead, entire regions of space rendered uninhabitable by the weapons they had used. The price of survival. "We saved them," Nina said, sitting beside him. "We saved everyone, did we?" David gestured at the reports. "These people died because we woke up. The Devourer came because we started thinking again. How is that saving anyone? You can't think that way. We didn't choose to wake up. That miner activated the pods by accident, I know. But knowing doesn't make it easier." Nina was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled up different data on her own pad. "There's something else. About the beacon. It needs constant maintenance and enormous power to keep running. But more than that, it needs minds." What do you mean?" "The simulation has to be convincing enough that the Devourer never wants to leave. That means it needs to be complex, dynamic, unpredictable, just like real consciousness. And the only way to make it that rich is to use actual conscious minds to help generate it." David understood immediately. "You want to put people back in suspension to power the beacon. Not just any people, humans. We have experience with long-term suspension. Our neural patterns are already compatible with the lullaby technology. And we owe this to the galaxy. We brought the Devourer here, even if it was an accident." "You're talking about sacrificing our species again. We just woke up." "Not sacrificing, serving. We rotate shifts. Nobody sleeps for more than a few years at a time. We live our lives, but we also maintain the beacon. It's a responsibility, yes, but it's also a choice." David wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her it wasn't fair, that humanity had already given enough. But he looked at the casualty reports again and knew she was right. They had brought this nightmare to the galaxy's doorstep. They had to be the ones to maintain the solution. The proposal went before the gathered humans 3 days later. Over 15,000 had been awakened from the suspension pods. They filled the facility's largest chamber, listening as Nina explained what needed to be done. The room was silent when she finished, then Amy stood up. "I spent my whole life fighting. I thought I'd died fighting 12,000 years ago. But I woke up and found out the fight wasn't over. Now you're asking me to go back to sleep so that thing out there can dream in peace. Yes, Nina said simply. Good, I volunteer. First rotation. One by one others stood. Foster, Samuel, hundreds more. Not all of them. Some wanted to live their newly returned lives without more sacrifice. That was their right. But enough volunteered to make the system work. David was among the volunteers. When Nina protested, he shook his head. I was their leader when we went to sleep the first time. I should be here for this too. The beacon station was constructed over the following months. A massive structure at the edge of council space, half military installation and half monument. Inside, new suspension pods were installed designed for the rotation system. Humans would sleep in shifts, their dreaming minds helping to maintain the quantum simulation that kept the devourer content. The first rotation began 6 months after the battle. 2,000 humans entered suspension, their consciousness flowing into the beacon's network. Inside the quantum space, the devourer sensed their presence and the simulation became richer, more real. Althea visited the station on the day the first rotation went under. She found Amy on the observation deck looking out at the swirling quantum field that contained the creature. Does it know? Althea asked. Does the devourer understand what you're doing for it? We think so. Nina says the readings show something like gratitude, something like peace. For the first time in its existence, it's not alone, and it's not hurting anymore. That's beautiful, sad but beautiful. Amy smiled. Yeah, we fought it for so long. Hated it for what it did to us. And now we're the ones giving it comfort. Funny how things work out. Will you go into the next rotation? Absolutely. I volunteered for this. Besides, someone needs to make sure that thing stays asleep. Can't trust just anyone with that job. The years passed. The beacon became a permanent fixture of galactic life. Humans integrated into council society, bringing their ancient knowledge and perspectives to a civilization that had moved on without them. They lived, worked, loved, and died like any other species, but they also maintained their sacred duty. The rotation system worked perfectly. Every few years, different humans would enter suspension to power the beacon, while others woke to live their lives. It was sacrifice, yes, but it was also purpose. They had returned from 10,000 years of sleep to save a galaxy that wasn't theirs anymore. And they had done it not through violence, but through compassion. David served 3 rotations before his age caught up with him. He spent his last days on the station, teaching younger humans about the old days and why the beacon mattered. On his final night, he stood on the observation deck and watched the quantum field pulse with life. Inside that field, the devourer dreamed. It dreamed of others like itself, of connection and belonging. It dreamed of warmth in the cold void, and somewhere in those dreams, perhaps it remembered the small beings who had given it this gift. The humans who had chosen mercy over vengeance, who had turned an ancient enemy into a responsibility they would bear forever. The galaxy thrived. New species joined the council. Old conflicts were resolved. Technologies advanced. And through it all, at the edge of known space, the beacon shined. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to understand rather than destroy, to protect rather than eliminate, to show that even the most terrible beast deserves peace, and that the species once feared as monsters themselves were actually the ones who understood mercy best of all. Humanity had slept for 10,000 years. They had awakened to face their greatest nightmare, and in the end, they had proven that the real power wasn't in their ancient weapons or their forgotten technology. It was in their willingness to sacrifice everything for a chance at a better tomorrow, not just for themselves, but for everyone, even for the beast they once feared.